My name is Angus Patterson. I'm the Senior Curator of Metalwork at the V&A, and among the many thousands of eye-catching objects we have in the collection here are one or two stomach-turning ones, and we're going to be unboxing one of those today. Normally we wear gloves in the museum when we're handling objects, particularly metal objects, to protect the metal from the salts in our fingers. But in this case we need to wear gloves also to protect us from the object, because the object inside this box is toxic. So the box is quite unusual. It's actually made from straw. You don't see that very often, or it doesn't survive very often. So I'd suggest looking at the style of this that it probably dates from the late 17th century, maybe 1680s onwards, but it's quite difficult to say where it may have been made. I'm going to take the lid off and reveal that inside is another box. This one actually made of tooled red leather that has actually got gold decoration on it as well. This is quite a precious box. So it's pressed with little tools to create this decoration, and then it's gilded. It's got gold decoration around the outside. I'm going to open this box by just removing this catch here very carefully, and then we will open up the box, and inside is a cup. It's very much in keeping with 17th century tumbler cups and even 17th century brass and bronze mortars for mixing potions in, which may be the sort of shape it was actually aiming for. Now that white grey metal looks a bit like pewter, which is an alloy mainly made of tin with a little bit of copper and antimony inside it, and was used for all sorts of metalwork, used around the home, almost as common as china plates maybe today. But we know this isn't pewter. It could easily be mistaken for it. What we know with this one is if we look back inside the lid, it says antimony cup. Now, antimony is a very toxic metal. It's been suggested that actually these cups were possibly alloys, so that antimony just made up a certain part of the metal. What we really wanted to do was test this object. And normally with an object like this that's been cast in a mould, you might expect to find a little bit of a tiny fraction of lead or something like that to help with the casting. And when we had it XRF tested, so it's X-ray fluorescence testing, it'll just point to areas of the surface. We were able to establish that this is almost entirely antimony. It's like 99.9% with a tiny fraction of lead, a little bit of iron as well, which could have just come off, the workshop floor in the mould, that sort of thing. And it's one of the reasons these objects need to be put in cases, because antimony is a lot more brittle than pewter. When used for making cups like this, the purpose of it is to try and make you vomit and have diarrhoea and sweat a lot, because the idea was that your body was made up of different humours, and when they were out of balance you needed to correct them by purging yourself. And so one of the ways to do it was to drink wine from one of these cups. And this one, you look inside, you can see that it looks like there's some evidence of use there. The bottom is a bit pitted, and there are quite a few little scrapes, as if it's been scraped maybe with a spoon at some stage. And you would leave wine in these cups overnight, and then you would take small doses the next day, and several doses should be enough to then purge your body. This object, it's got two little lines down the side which look like seams, but they don't appear on the inside, and it has what's known as a sprue mark on the bottom there, so it appears it's been cast in antimony, a bit like a bell, so it's just been poured from the top upside down, and then there's lines on the outside of where the mould has been opened up and the object has been taken out. There are only around about half a dozen of these objects, these cups, that survive in Britain. Almost all in museums. It's also possible that there are more of these that are misidentified as pewter. So a number of the other objects that survive, if they have been dropped, they often have pieces missing from them. This one is in very good condition. The boxes have done their job, which is why we always keep it very close to the table, and so that we can continue to keep this object going for another 300 years at least. Now, antimony cups are first marketed in England really in the 1630s. There's a chap called John Evans, who's a clergyman and an astrologer. John Evans was a controversial figure who was described as a rogue and a quack doctor, i.e. somebody that wasn't properly qualified and made up medicines to help people. In 1634, John Evans publishes a pamphlet called The Universal Medicine, The Virtues of the Antimonial Cup, in which he claimed it could disperseth the dropsy, cureth the jaundice, procureth cheerfulness and gladness of heart. And in his pamphlet he cited around about 100 people who claimed it had helped them recover from illness. So Evans claimed that if you kept wine in one of his cups warm overnight, by the morning if you drank small quantities of it, it would very quickly start to induce vomiting and diarrhoea and sweating in order to purge your body. One doctor called James Primrose wrote a furious response to Evans's pamphlet called The Antimonial Cup Twice Cast, in which he said that the main purpose of Evans's pamphlet was to encourage people to buy the cups that he was making in his little workshop in Gunpowder Alley. Soon after, William Laud, Archbishop of Canterbury, actually had John Evans's pamphlet burnt in the street. It was causing that much controversy. Very acidic wine would perhaps leach out too much of the antimony from the cup and cause overdoses. And so under more controlled conditions, it still wouldn't have been very pleasant, I wouldn't have thought, but purging the body was seen as something that was quite successful and carried on being used right up until the 19th century for a whole variety of different ailments. Most of that controversy happened in the middle of the 17th century. That was a revival, really. Antimony had been popular up until the middle of the 16th century. In fact, the Romans way back used to use antimonial remedies. But antimony, unregulated, caused a lot of problems. And in France, in the middle of the 1560s, it actually was made illegal. It was illegal in England as well. And it really becomes revived in the middle of the 17th century. This object, however, dates from the late 17th century, several decades after Evans was publishing his pamphlet. And we have a nice little clue inside the lid of the leather box. And it says Lord Peterborough's. Now the question is, which Lord Peterborough might it have been? The most likely candidate was Charles Mordaunt, the third Lord Peterborough, who was a very prominent military general and politician who was instrumental in bringing William of Orange to the throne. But throughout his life he suffered from kidney stones and had frequent bouts where he was confined to his bed, and he eventually dies in 1735, soon after having what must have been an extremely painful operation. So with the cup, when we bought it in 1900, was a letter. Okay, so the letter is addressed to Mrs. Anne Shaw of Goodwood in Sussex. And interestingly, the letter is dated the London 13th of May 1775, and it refers to this cup, so it was in use for a good 80 years after it was first made. And the letter comes from Dr. Brocklesby. Now, Dr. Brocklesby was Richard Brocklesby, who was actually quite a famous physician, very much part of the establishment. So here is the establishment using antimony as part of a remedy. He becomes chief physician in the British Army in the middle of the 18th century. And by 1775, he's a pretty eminent and well-published doctor. So the letter says, Dr. Brocklesby's compliments to Mrs. Shaw, and in answer to her desire to be informed about the antimonial cup and how to use it, fill the cup with Lisbon wine or Moselle wine, set it by to stand 24 hours, and then pour it into a wine glass. 2 tablespoons are to be taken at first, and after waiting from 10 to 15 minutes, give a 3rd spoonful unless the first has begun to operate. But if 3 fail, after 15 minutes, then give a 4th or a 5th, if required, at due intervals, and most commonly, the 3rd produces nausea, sickness and vomiting. It is to be wrought off like another vomit by taking at proper intervals a pint at a time from 2 to 3 quarts of bitter and strong chamomile tea. London, 13th May 1775. So I think it shows if Dr. Brocklesby, who's an eminent physician, is writing this in 1775, antimonial remedies have certainly gained traction in the medical profession. So it's really not until the First World War that antimonial remedies ceased to be in use. During the 19th century, families would own perpetual pills, which were made of antimony, and you would swallow them, and they would pass through your system, and you could retrieve them afterwards, and then you could pass them down almost literally through your family, and they became known as perpetual pills, little family heirlooms to be passed down. Not sure I'd fancy swallowing a pill that had been through my grandpa, but needs must when you have a stomach ache in 1750. So we've had these in the collection since 1900. The boxes, they've done their job of actually protecting the object over the years, and we continue to keep the objects in the box even when they're on display. And this will protect the object but also protect anybody else when they're handling it. And then for a little extra security and protection, can go into the outer straw box and place the lid on really carefully. So it's all nicely boxed up and protected, ready to go back on display. One of only 6 or 7 antimonial cups to survive in Britain, so extremely rare. Nice relic of 17th and 18th century medicine, made even rarer by the fact that it has its 2 protective cases, and even better, it has a letter giving you instructions on how to use it. But don't try this at home.